Good afternoon and welcome to our March Change Makers Education Series. We are so excited to have you. We're going to give it a few moments before we start our panel and Ms. Rosie Allen-Heron begins the webinar. So thank you so much for joining us. Please don't hesitate to put any questions in the chat box. We have time for questions and answers towards the end of the panel, and we look forward to this opportunity to speak with you. Thank you.
All right, well, we see that we have quite a few in, so we will go ahead and begin so we can give you back your time, hopefully at the end of this hour. So welcome and good afternoon to the launch of our United Way NCA Change Makers on Education series. I'm Rosie Allen-Heron, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Your United Way. At United Way of the National Capital Area, we believe that we are uniquely positioned at the intersection of public, private, philanthropic, and nonprofit sectors to bring the best resources, individuals, and organizations together to solve some of our region's most pressing issues facing our communities today. So today is the first in a 10-part education series where we will be convening thought leaders in areas of solutions that advance equity in the region, as well as certainly our community and nationally. The topics will include the intersectionality of gender and equity, racial equity and program design and effectiveness, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on mental health, and more. And at United Way of the NCA, we really believe that when none are ignored, all will indeed thrive. So thank you for being here with us today. We're also in the midst of March. We're celebrating Women's History Month, and we reflect on all that has changed for working women over the last not only 24 months, but when we certainly think about it, even over the years. A June 21st or June 2021 article from McKinsey Company stated that a record number of women have left the workforce just during the COVID-19 crisis over the last 24 months. And this is accounted for 53% of the actual labor workforce that has exited. I think that that's an astonishing statistic. Just in the first 12 months of the pandemic, women accounted for 53% of the US workforce labor exits. And so we really want to talk about that today. So today we're going to look at that trend and what it means when we lose women in the workforce, what it means for us in terms of the thought leadership and the perspective that is lost with being at the table. And what are the new opportunities that have disproportionately impacted those of Black and Latina descent, as well as how do we then think about returning to work in a post-COVID environment? And so we also want to discuss solutions and opportunities for organizations to attract, better retain, and certainly support women employees. So we're honored to have our guests with us today. They are our partners in leadership. We have two phenomenal women who will share not only their expertise and their perspectives around women in the workplace, but help us seek some of those solutions that we believe will help us to be able to move forward. First up is Ms. Jennifer L. Porter. Ms. Porter was appointed to serve as Executive Director of the Mayor's Office on Women's Policy and Initiatives by Mayor Muriel Bowser. She took on this role in 2019, and she serves as the Bowser administration's Chief Advocate for women and women's issues in Washington, D.C. As director, Jennifer collaborates with local and national nonprofit organizations and public agencies to address the needs of women. Mrs. Porter also advises Mayor Bowser on women policy areas and all those areas of need for women and their initiatives. So welcome, Mrs. Porter, to the proverbial stage today with United Way of the National Capital Area. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for being with us. Also joining us is Ms. Sheila Murphy, co-founder of FlexProfessionals. Sheila is co-founder of FlexProfessional and oversees candidate recruiting and screening, which is pretty hot right about now, and support services for job seekers, as well as human resources for the company. She is a seasoned speaker, presenter, and trainer on a variety of job search and career development topics. She routinely conducts workshops for the Department of State's Foreign Affairs and Foreign Service Institute, as well as the International Monetary Fund and their foundation, as well as numerous parent organizations and career conferences. We're really excited to have both Sheila and Jennifer with us. So welcome to you both. Thank you, Sheila, for agreeing to be with us. Thank you, Jennifer, for agreeing to work with us today. So I don't know if we have each other spotlighted, but you're number 3 on my screen because you're actually on camera, and we know that we have a great number of individuals who may be streaming with us, but also on as a part of the webinar. So I'm looking forward to having a great discussion. And again, welcome to your United Ways speaker series. So thank you for being here. So as we sort of kind of introduce this topic, because we do want this to appear somewhat informal, while we've discussed a little bit of the things that we want to make certain we get across to our audience, this is not scripted. So this is really about us having a true dialogue and ensuring that we're able to convey some information. Certainly we want our audience to lead this conversation today, continuing to talk about this particular issue that we think is so important. So as we think about this, over the past 3 decades, women in the workplace have continued to make slow but steady, hard-earned progress in the areas of leadership, pay equity, hiring, retention programs, adequate support services that are good for women of color. And until March 2020, we thought that that progress was continuing to move forward, and most headway had been accomplished in the C-suite. But now let's look at the data. In 2020, 2.3 million women left the workforce. And of the 5.4 million jobs lost to women in the first year of the pandemic, 1 in 4 women expressed concern that they were considering stepping back or stepping out of the workplace in general. Is it possible that 50 years of progress has been lost just because of the pandemic, literally in 1 year? Thoughts?
Scary.
Wow. Yes.
I'll get out. Whoever wants to speak first. Okay, Jennifer, go ahead. You're lit up in my box. So
Sure.
years?
Well, and in a way we have. And first, I just want to say thank you so much to the entire United Way team. It is amazing to have such a powerful organization and leader in our region, and to have a woman in leadership. It's truly an honor to be here on behalf of our mayor, Muriel Bowser, who this very conversation is at the center of all of the dialogue that she and I have been having. We have taken a step back in the progress of as far as numbers of women increasing. What we have had the opportunity to do, which is different, is to learn. And we've learned by being able to be seen. So as women, when they come to work as leaders, they come to work with their children, with those they are caring for, and they're often serious because they have a lot that is at stake and a lot to lose. Mm-hmm. But during the pandemic, in our respective Brady Bunch boxes, we have been able to see moms. We have been able to see like never before, all that women are carrying. And so that is an opportunity for us not just to look at challenges in the home as reasons for burnout for women, but as to really challenge the entire system. So what in the inefficiencies of our system are not working for moms, not working for women, and why are they leaving? And I think it's an opportunity for us to really break down some of the challenges that have caused us to not be able to see the solutions because of stigma, because of tropes, strong women tropes that we have continued in society that have left us from being able to look at the trends and the dynamics that are causing women to be dissatisfied, but who were still staying. So I think the answer to that question is yes, and because it's also an opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Sheila, Thoughts? Have we lost 50 years worth of headway?
No, I agree. I think you have to take the negative, and also you have to make lemonade out of lemons. And so, I look at it two different ways. I look at it like this. So, I ask myself the question often, what would have happened had women not left? Had they not been so stressed out and frustrated? What might have happened had they, at that point in time, communicated better and negotiated for the flexibility that they needed? And that didn't happen, but I think we ought to look at that. And I think that's part of the solution here. So I think women they're skeptical to come back. They're not coming back so quickly, but this is an opportunity for women to remove their personal barriers of lack of confidence, being able to better negotiate, and being able to better communicate, because that's what men did. Men got promotions. Many men got promotions. Many men got the flexibility that they wanted. So I think that's an opportunity for women, but I also think it's an opportunity for employers. How can employers provide that type of skills and training? Because it is part of professional development. So yes. I see that as the one piece of this. And then the other piece is businesses, they were forced to embrace flexibility in order to survive, right? And they did it pretty well. Those that did it survived, and it often meant 100% remote work. But there's so much more to flexibility than 100% remote. So businesses have the opportunity right now to look at their own organizations and to ask the question, what can we do? How can we operationalize flexibility? What does it mean to us? And how can we define it and put it into practice so that this doesn't happen again? And so that women can come back, and operationalizing flexibility and figuring out what it means for you. And we can talk about this more later. That is probably the best thing you can do for your diversity initiatives, whether it's bringing on more women or more underrepresented women and women of color. It's the best thing you can do.
Absolutely. So now that we've gotten at least some of your first thoughts about at least the issue of the moment and whether or not we had lost that headway, I wanted to use that as an intro for you to talk about your own personal stories. Yes, I gave the bios that are there for you, in terms of the work that you're doing with the mayor's office and then starting your own business with Sheila and Jennifer. But let's hear a little bit about your own stories if you were introducing yourself to the audience so they can get the context of why I asked you about that 50-year mark first before I said, tell me a little bit about yourself. So why don't we start with you, Jennifer, and then we'll go to you, Sheila. Share a little bit of your stories.
Thanks, Rosie. And I'm happy to share. And I'm also happy to just piggyback really quickly on something that Sheila shared. She mentioned the word confidence. And I think that's a theme for a lot of women as a part of our journey. Sometimes it's a part of our unlearning. And sometimes it's a part of our learning. And I think during the pandemic, not only for myself, but prioritizing the work that we do and teaching women how to negotiate higher salaries, it's been a theme in my entire life. I think when I think of confidence for women, there's always this reciprocal nature that it goes both ways, right? We have to change the system while we activate women to ask for what they want. And I think there's confidence in ourselves. There's also something that changed, confidence in the policy. So for a lot of women, the policy says you can't telework, and the policy says, you're not able to get a certain pay. And to Sheila's point, the pandemic really just shattered all of that. We're able to telework. We're able to negotiate fringe. And for me, now women are asking the question, well, who made the policy and who is it for? And so I am originally from St. Louis, Missouri, grew up in Ferguson, and the daughter of a domestic violence advocate. My mom was a champion and warrior for women who had survived one of the most horrific experiences in their life. And that experience, seeing my mom work with women, help them to navigate getting resources and placing their children, it sparked a desire on my end, seeing girls and seeing the children of the survivors that my mom was working with. How can we make sure that the careers and the health of these children that I found myself seeing, how can we make sure that they're the services that, as we prioritize their families, that they're not left behind? And it led me on a quest. I came here to the Howard University. A shout out to all the bison on the line. My love and my passion for science was always really bright when it came to STEM subjects. And I was looking for a way to combine both my passion as well as what I was really good at. And public health for me was that nice marriage of both the social components that contributed to our health, but also looking at data and epidemiology. Now, 2 years later, people know what an epidemiologist is, but it's been amazing. And so making policy decisions and advising policy based on data, but also understanding the social dynamics. The numbers don't always tell the story. And so how can we make sure that we are leading community-based programs and not community-placed programs where we, in a lab or in a room, create ideas that we place on communities that are not led by the community. So I spent 10 years of my career at Children's National in pediatric health, and my research focused on HIV prevention and pregnancy prevention for young people. And our outstanding mayor was looking to prioritize maternal and infant health. And I was appointed as the youngest cabinet member. I'm a proud millennial. And I'm proud to share that because our diversity, a lot of times when we have this conversation around diversity, it's not just gender, it's also age, it's ability. And so I'm proud to be here. And so Rosie, having women like you in Washington, Sheila, and seeing this amazing landscape of the work that we have to do, I'm inspired every day to continue to advocate for the folks in the back of the room, the folks that may be not at the center stage, but thinking about the folks in the gap. So it's been an honor. I'm not done, but I'm excited to continue this work with partners like you all.
Well, thank you so much. And what a powerful story of most people may or may not know that Jennifer is a twin. And so there is Jessica. And I, have the pleasure of knowing Ms. Porter personally and find it fascinating when we're talking about women in the workforce. And a lot of the things I definitely want you to opine on as being a young mother in the workforce, certainly at a high level, being in a mayor's cabinet, and what that means for you as you're on that journey even still. So thank you again for being with us. So Sheila, what a story to tell.
Thank you, Rosie. So my name is Sheila Murphy. I own a company called FlexProfessionals. We started FlexProfessionals about 12 and a half years ago. I partnered with two other amazing women to start our company. And our niche, we are a recruiting and staffing firm that focuses almost 100% on part-time work arrangements and some full-time flex. And the way the story goes is we were all mothers of young children. We've had 8 children, combined total of 8 children. We also had gaps in our resumes. We had all taken career breaks for a combined total of at least 20 years, probably closer to 30. And we were all looking to get back into the workforce, and we're having a terrible time finding meaningful, substantive work that paid. And for various reasons, we all wanted to get back in, but wanted the flexibility. So we could not find that type of work in a part-time basis. And so for me, I, at the time, was a widow. My husband died at the young age of 42. I was 40 years old. I had an 8, a 6, and a 2-year-old. And so while many women don't have the option to work part-time, I did, fortunately, but I couldn't find any good work out there. So we did what women tend to do when they can't find what they're looking for, and we created it. And the model that we have is that part-time is a win-win. It's a win-win for a smaller business, for a smaller nonprofit that needs really quality talent, but not necessarily full-time. And it's a win-win for caregivers, for men and women that are looking to re-enter the workforce after having cared for young children, or for those that are stressed out and working full-time that are looking to scale back in order to care. And these days, it's not just for children, right? We have a huge aging population. And there are many women out there that are caring for aging family members as well.
Absolutely. And thank you all for coming into the chat. We're going to have a Q&A, so please keep those thoughts going so we don't lose them at the appropriate time to address them as well. So I want to go because we have some great thought leaders on this session as well. They may be on the webinar, not on screen, but Jennifer, you mentioned coming from a mother who, I think the way you termed it, who was a domestic violence warrior. And I love that because warrior says winning, in my estimation. It does not say victim. It does not say, someone on the losing end of it. It says it acknowledges the battle, but it also acknowledges the victory that can be had. And I don't know if she knows that I know she's on here, but Indira Hannard, who is the head of the DC Rape Crisis Center, is one of those warriors that I see at work every day doing this work. So when you think about, what you've been able to watch, view, and sort of kind of emulate and see growing up, what do you think about the disruptions that have happened now for women? When we think about, again, 2 years ago, where women were in the workforce and where women are now, having made the decision ultimately that really was more of the women to bear the decisions about leaving the workforce as we found ourselves continuing to go in the year 2020. No one saw COVID coming. I say this all the time. No one saw COVID coming. And when we found ourselves in the moment, no one could have anticipated that COVID will last as long as it has. And so it was, we thought we'd be back in 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and then it went through 6 months, and then 8 months. And then before you know it, it was a year. In the entire 2021, people were making decisions about where they wanted to be. And it wasn't just whether or not we're going to go and stand in line for the toilet paper rolls. It was about, whether or not we were going to get off that roller coaster, what it looked like for us to be, working remotely and the like. So as we think about women, what do you think about this paradigm shift? Has it been a disruption because of where women are in the workplace? And then Sheila, I'm going to ask your thoughts on, as we now are on this return to the office strategy. People say it's return to work. People have been working all along. It's returning to the office in terms of the environment that we know it or have known it to be. What does that look like? So Jennifer, has there been a paradigm shift? And then Sheila, what do we think that's going to look like as people return to the office?
I think there has been a paradigm shift. And, I often think about even just being a millennial, sometimes it's seen as such a negative connotation. But one of the things that I think, as I talk to my mom and to her elders and my, grandparents, one of the things that has shifted is this concept of understanding, in my mom's generation, the generation before her, they were encouraging her, get all the education you can, go for the corporate life, work, because the generation of women before, they were in the home. And so that financial freedom and that ability to be able to shape your own destiny was really instilled and encouraged. And so enter the millennials who, as a result, were latchkey kids because our mothers were climbing the corporate ladder and got to see some of the challenges, but also the benefits of having the opportunities and exposure from both parents. So now the paradigm is shifting to say, I've seen both sides and I know climbing the corporate ladder is wonderful, but that balance of mom being able to be at the soccer games and being able to be home, we see the pendulum sort of shifting back. COVID exploited all of that, right? And so we were forced to really shift and see to understand the value of being in the home and being together for those who didn't have that opportunity, but also the challenges of climbing the corporate ladder or climbing that ladder. And so the paradigm shift, I think for us, again, puts the onus back on women, and it changes the climate in a couple of ways. For a lot of women to continue to climb, advocacy and sponsorship is so important. And in a virtual setting, a lot of time that happens after meetings, that happens at the water cooler, being able to hone our craft. And you don't see that in a virtual space, right? And so being able to create community and create places where we can continue to learn and continue to pull each other up, as we say, but also really being able to find that voice. And so you mentioned as a mom, I think for me coming back, my son was born on March 2nd, 2020, 7 days before the world shut down. And what any idea I had of what new motherhood looked like was completely shattered. And so to your point, I mean, finding toilet paper for me was a challenge. I needed wipes for a newborn. And so being able to stand in my voice and say, this is what I need for survival, kind of alluding to my earlier point, moms have been doing this. Like we've been managing sick children, but we haven't seen it. We haven't been able to see it in the way that, you know, having a board meeting and there's a screaming little one behind you, or, you know, different things going on. So being able to see it, I think, has allowed for the paradigm shift to say, hey, I'm going to log off. And I need to do that now to preserve my mental health, to preserve my home. But I also need to continue to climb, and I need to be at this table. We just need to shift to make it all work. And so I think women are really in a place to leverage, to be able to leverage to say, these are the shifts that need to happen. Again, to my earlier point about the policy confidence, the policy has shifted. We've been home, all of the things that we didn't see the policy allowing, we've now been forced to do that. So I'm excited about that paradigm shift, and I hope that we can preserve some of the things that we've learned as we come into the next new normal.
And it will be a new normal for sure. So Sheila, as you think about what's happened over the last 2 years, you know, one of the things, the terminology has always changed, you know, the COVID moms and this, that, and the other. And there's a term called COVID-induced homemakers, you know, where, you know, again, because of COVID and, you know, or again, for many of the mothers, and you talked about your own collective experience with the other women, where you all had stepped out of the workforce for whatever reason, and that collective almost 30 years of experience between the number of you who decided to go into business. When we think about the COVID-induced homemaker, people who were forced to deal with this, we see that too was disproportionately impacted by women. Because of course, when you say the word homemaker, you do assume it's a woman. But it's a matter of thinking through for women of color, for women and more of, you know, we were amazed during COVID what became an essential job. You know, you're assuming essential are, you know, who's important. And you found out that the grocery store clerk was important. You know, you found out, you know, who knew that the grocery store clerk was important unless you were standing in a line asking them to unstock something so that you could get a, you know, crack at it, if you will. And so women in our Washington area, we're heavy tourism. And so when we think about women who are in the hospitality industry, many of those jobs are low wage jobs. If you don't work, you don't get paid. So there isn't a lot of leave, there isn't a lot of benefit and things of that nature. So when we think about the COVID-induced homemaker and its impact on women, as we sort of kind of now come in an upswing, what's your thoughts about how we're returning to the workforce, and what does that look like?
Yeah. So, you know, I think that above all, so we just did a focus group with moms of younger children who talked about the difficulties of COVID and the blurred lines, that it was particularly difficult for caregivers working 100% remote, yet being 100% caregiver at the same time, those blurred lines and how difficult it was. And also concerns about working remotely because so many women were forced to do that, and what it meant in terms of their value because oftentimes FaceTime in an office is those who are there, those that are in person are valued more. So there's a lot, to me, with this focus group, but it's also from interviewing and speaking with women that are older as well, that are also caregivers. There's a similar theme that what is really most important to them in terms of returning to work is really a work culture and a work environment that is inclusive and supportive and family friendly. And this, I think, at the end of the day, is what's going to lure people back, and it's what's going to keep them back. And let's face it, companies, nonprofits, organizations, happy employees and productive employees that you don't have to train and retrain and then have to, hire. And it's like that, the hamster wheel. Those creating that culture is going to it's going to save you so much money, but it's also going to make your people feel more valued and be more productive. And I think that this is probably the most important thing for companies to think about, because there are talent wars out there now. There are an incredible amount of job openings out there. So in order to woo your talent, you need to sell what you do to create that culture that is family friendly. And I think that is really important, which kind of leads into the next piece of it is they're looking for you to tell your prospective employees, the women that you want to hire and you want to bring back, what you're going to do with regard to flexibility. What does that mean? And it shouldn't just be for a certain type of worker. It really can be for everybody. I mean, I think in the past people say, well, that's not true. If I'm a bagger at the grocery store, I can't have flexible hours. Well, my guess is that if you put your heads together and get creative, there's many different forms of flexibility. So it doesn't have to be 100% remote. It could be part remote, part in office. It could be reduced hours or part-time work. It could be job sharing. It could be, we expect you to be online or in the office between 10 and 2, but after that, you can get your work done here's the metrics, this is what you need to produce. You can get it done whenever. It doesn't have to be between 9 and 5. So core working hours, there could be compressed work weeks. You could offer sabbaticals for other types of jobs. So there's a lot there in terms of flexibility. And I think thinking about that and making sure it's a shared vision and it's inclusive is going to help bring back women and bring back women of color. So an example is, you're hiring and the job seeker says, I need flexibility. And you say, sure, we are flexible. Well, if you don't have that defined, some people in your office are going to embrace it. And those are going to be managers that people are going to love to work for. And other people are going to resist it. But if you define it and implement it from top down and from bottom up, and everybody is on the same page, then that is going to, it's going to bring women back. And it's also going to create that culture that's going to keep them there so that when the next pandemic happens, they don't leave again because you've got their back, right? And usually if you're the employer and you have your employees back, well, guess what? They're going to have your back too. Because it works both ways, right?
It does. So Sheila, I want to follow up on a couple of things that you said, because there was a lot of energy there. I felt it coming on, especially as we're now in this mode of returning to the office. And one of the questions I really wanted to throw out at you, particularly as you're staffing, and clearly there is a war for talent right about now. And, we've talked about the She Session for succession and all of the things that are happening with women, and now the lure to really and truly attract and retain top talent that may have left for whatever reason, the workforce over the past, 24 months or so. What do you think most employers, you gave some of the tools about, I wrote down, part-time, online flexibility with the core hours, compressed work weeks, job sharing, sabbaticals, and things of that nature. Are there any other things that a good best-in-class organization, your United Way, we're an organization that employs a great number of people from varied skill sets. And I'm just, it's a pleasure of mine to simply work with them and to allow them to be their best selves and to have an environment conducive to them being their best selves so that we can retain them and that thought leadership. And this is, in my estimation, what's a small price to pay for an organization to be successful with people who know that you care for them as an individual, not just a person sitting in the seat. What else should organizations and companies be doing?
Okay, so I'll throw one at you that you probably don't hear very often. I think that there is a disconnect between what executives at the highest levels believe that they value most about workers, which is judgment, ability to manage competing priorities, ability to communicate effectively, and all of those things, right? And then at the lower levels of the organizations, those that are the gatekeepers of all those resumes that are coming into the system, they're weeding people out because they don't have a certain technology skill or they've got a gap in their resume. And so I think if employers changed the way they hired and they actually took resumes and saw possibilities in people and not reasons to discount them, they would find that their talent pool, the quality of their talent pool would increase. And they would be giving opportunities, particularly to women who have gaps in their resumes for caregiving or for those life moments, challenges. And I think that could go a long way. So peaks and valleys in resumes should not be considered a negative. With the tech talent demands out there, tech wars, demands for technical talent, there's a lot of technical jobs that can be done that don't require degrees. So let's not just weed out people who don't have college degrees. And I think that doesn't cost an employer anything. That is more about communicating to those people who are hiring managers or your HR and recruiting professionals to change the way we do business, because our systems, our technology systems, weed out really good people. And that's what they're doing. They weed out moms. We know that all the time. That's what we sell to our companies. We have this talent pool that you're overlooking. Trust us. And we develop that relationship over time. And then we find that they come back because they love our talent. And our talent are the people who left the workforce.
Absolutely. So Jennifer, as we think about you in the public sector, and one of the biggest numbers of people who are in the workforce, of course, are in the public sector. You're with a phenomenal, multi-tens of thousands in the city government. But of course, because of where you are in proximity, you're with the U.S. Department of Labor, which has a federal workforce of 800,000 here, just in the Washington area alone, so to speak. What are you seeing on the public side? A lot of what Sheila shared with us, we can see a lot of that flexibility, where there's the latitude, if you will, of a private company or more of a corporate where there's agile decision making. What do you do in a bureaucracy that's public, a public service, if you will?
Absolutely. And I'm so grateful for this question. I'm grateful for all of the leaders who are asking this question, because it can be daunting to kind of shift, because it takes a culture shift. I think it was Zig Ziglar, I may be misquoting, that said, culture eats strategy for breakfast every day. And it's so true. And I think there are a couple of things to retain talent that are especially critical in the government. And I think when I talked earlier about that policy confidence, so much of our policy is regulated by residents, right? And so first, having women in leadership, and I'm really proud of the Bowser administration and the women in leadership, just a diversity of leadership that when we do need to shift, the voices that are represented in the decisions represent a diversity of experiences. That's critical. And so the first step is making sure that the leadership is diverse. And we can do that in a couple of ways. First, flexibility. And whether that is flexibility in flexible leadership structures, flexibility in telework, and also flexibility in management styles. Equal pay. Paying people equitably is a part of their success, retention, and leadership. And I say leadership, and some people say, well, how is equal pay a part of their leadership? Women negotiate so many things in their lives, and including, and especially in our region, their personal budgets. Being able to, as women, as leaders, and I think Stacey Abrams said it best, women as the backbone is not just a social or spiritual thing. Quite often, when family members need to be taken care of as caregivers, women fall in, when children have to be removed or moved to different homes, women are often the leaders. But what happens when we compound women taking on a disproportionate rate of leadership in their community, compound that with low pay, and they're taking on all of these other economic responsibilities, we create a challenge for their leadership. Transparency. Transparency is so important. And in bureaucracies, that's very often a challenge because we want to make sure that the decision makers have the autonomy. Why? Because they are responsible. They raise their hands under oath, and they are, those folks that are responding. But transparency allows for our teams to say, if I'm not delivering on a particular metric, here's why. And having that reciprocal conversation says, what do I need to re-engineer around my leadership and my system to make sure that my team can either meet the metrics or communicate in transparency? We're not going to be able to make this. I remember at my council hearing in 2020, there's a list of questions that we usually get every year that are codified by law. We have to respond to the things that we've done, and being able to say the reasons why we didn't do certain things because of COVID. And obviously being a little nervous because there were metrics that we didn't deliver on, but we were so proud of the programming that we offered during COVID and the shift that we took on, because we were able to create novel programming that's sustained to today and create spaces that women are still excited about and are demanding that we continue. I'll give you one example. We created a women's financial series. In 2020, women accounted for 100% of jobs lost in the December job report. And so we created this virtual women's financial literacy series. In our first session, I think we may have had 30 or 40 women. We learned from surveys and from feedback, and we ended the series with 180 women who were so excited and asking us when the next session was. But what we learned is we created this space. Finances are so personal. And so having in-person sessions where we're talking about divorce and money and stocks and retirement, women needed a safe space in a virtual space to talk about these really complex personal issues around finance. And we learned that we created something that was very special, and it took for the pandemic for us to shift that program to be virtual. So the transparency of learning from that is really important. And I'll really quickly share the last two things I have. Creating a culture of self-care and rest. Rest is a part of our productivity. And it's not enough to say, oh yeah, you can take off when things are finished. Leadership has to set the tone. If our leaders are not taking leave, not taking vacation, what that does is it creates, again, a culture that says, while you may be given this opportunity, the value set that we have placed on is your productivity and not a part of your rest. And that's so important. And then lastly, and this one, I stick a pin in this, folks who are kind of double teaming or multitasking, pay attention to this one: cross-training and versatility in leadership. We have learned as women during this time, particularly women in leadership and women in STEM and STEAM fields, being able to not just have the technical training, but also to cross-train. A lot of us had to YouTube University through this time, so many things, right? Learning technology, but being able to have your teams not only to learn what they are supposed to do in their roles, but having opportunities to shadow those in leadership, having opportunities to, I love when I give my team, when my team members, my associate directors lead our team meetings, because they can flex those muscles. And that is a part of leadership development, but it's also a part for them to explore other sides of their passion that they may not necessarily have been. So again, in that bureaucracy, we want to hold on to so much, let go and invest in our teams. Paid trainings, invest in their trainings is so important. So I'll stop there because I could go.
No, I'm loving this. And so I do want to, because I want to be respectful of time. We have about 13 minutes left. I do want to get some questions from our audience who may be with us or even streaming. I know if you have an opportunity to place a thought in the chat, please share it with us. We want to ensure that we capture that. My colleague Stephanie Crane has popped on the screen. She's going to help us look through those. And I know that some may have presented some to us before we even began, but I did see the one in the chat from Mr. Suarez. I think it's Eduardo. Stephanie, you want to share that thought with our guest?
Yes, thank you so much, Rosie, and thank you to our panelists. Eduardo stated that he believes the only way to learn the reason for anyone leaving the sector, the workforce sector, would be by making it a survey to just make sure that we're being very conscientious about the reasons why, and any prior opinion would be uncertain. So we don't want that to become the basis of reaching, invalid conclusions. So we want to make sure that we're being really mindful and checking in with our workforce about the reasons why they felt the need to leave, so that we can make really clear responses to and be responsive to those reasons. So I hope I captured that correctly, Eduardo, and feel free to type in the chat if there was additional to support that, but just wanted to highlight that. So thank you, Rosie. And we do have a couple of questions that came in before. So just wanted to ask to both panelists, what are some of the biggest barriers women face when negotiating at work? And what can leadership do to create a safe space for women to negotiate? And I think we covered some of this, but would just love to hear a little bit more.
Oh gosh, I think that the barriers that women face in terms of negotiating are often personal barriers. So Jennifer talked about that lack of confidence, the feeling that they get to the point where the need for that flexibility or their needs become so strong that they get frustrated and leave, instead of shifting the mindset about, okay, what value would it be to the company for me to reduce my hours, or to not have to go into work 5 days a week, or to be able to work a different work schedule, or to be able to manage my deadlines and timelines more on my time, right? So I think part of this is women having to shift how they present that, right? As not as a need, but as this can benefit both of us, and here's how, and to actually lay it out in a way that is compelling and conversational, right? And some of this is iterative, and it will take some time. But I think that sometimes women feel guilty, and they don't advocate for what they need, and they don't do it as smart and strategic as women are. They don't necessarily do it in a strategic way. So that would be my tip.
Thank you.
I would say ditto and amen to everything that Sheila just said. I think one of the things that, and again, it's a generational thing, but we define ourselves by the role and the title. And the reality is, the day that we croak, there will be a listing up for this role that we have defined ourselves by. When we negotiate, we should be at the first and forefront. It should be the lifestyle and not the role. So learning about the role and understanding, do you have to use your personal vehicle? What are the hours? How do you feel in this role? What are the social challenges and bureaucracy that you have to go through? But starting with your actual personal budget, what do you need to survive? What do you need to thrive? Outside of defining yourself in this role or the career trajectory that you're on, you have needs. And so starting there and saying, here's the baseline that I need. I live in a very expensive city. I have this background and expertise. These are the things that I need. And I think women, we don't even start there. I think we start with the role, right? And so if Jennifer Porter is in this role, regardless of what those are sitting next to me or have come before or even have come after, ideally, I leave it in a place where people that come after me make more. But I want to know that in this role, I can thrive personally in my personal life. I think also negotiating fringe. That's something we're not often taught. And if anybody who works in the DC metropolitan area knows anything about parking, if you can negotiate parking, that can literally be $3,000 or $4,000 of your annual income. So negotiating things like that, I think women are just not taught to do that, but it's so important. And then also really being able to communicate the diversity of what you bring. Often we say, I'm a great writer, I'm a great editor, but they're hiring me as a biostatistician. And so I'm going to lean into that. What you can negotiate everything that you bring, because guarantee in that line and other duties as assigned, you will be leaning into those other roles. And so negotiate all of that because it is what you bring to the table.
Thank you so much. I think we might have time for one more quick question. So let me try to see if I can sneak this one in for you all. As a supervisor, how can I best foster an environment of leadership for women on my team?
I'm going to let you answer that, Jennifer.
Okay, I love this question. I'm lighting up. I'm excited because I think one of the best things you can do as a leader is to continue to learn and grow. I think where we fail in leadership is kind of where we hit our stride and we know everything. But as our workforce changes, we have to continue to learn and to change. I think they're having really great one-on-ones and check-ins. They're really great tools and resources, asking questions like, what are we not doing that we should be doing? Which is a really open question, but that allows for your team to say, hey, I think we're doing great work, but to actually take the mental step to really learn and think about things that really may be on the tip of their tongue. I really wish we did this, or I really wish we did that. Having a really good subset of questions for your check-ins and one-on-ones to be able to think outside of your leadership and continue to grow. So I'll leave with those two things, but I am so excited because leadership development is a big part of us supporting women. And I know it's a big commitment, not only to the Bowser administration, but the great work at United Way. So it's exciting to talk about this.
I think mentoring programs are the key to that. And there's, larger companies have probably more resources to develop more formal mentoring programs. And I think that would be a huge hook if it's truly mentor, a truly done, if it's done well, that could be a huge hook to hire and retain women. And then I would say for the smaller organizations, maybe the burden might be on the worker herself, but there's lots of mentoring programs out there. Like there's Women in Technology is a great example of a professional organization that has a mentor protege program that's very good. So I think that there's opportunities out there, and that would do a lot to boost and develop leaders.
So it says, as we think about this, I know we have about 4 or 5 minutes left, and I do want to give you an opportunity to sort of kind of wrap up with us. Some of the things that we've talked about are somewhat generic, if you will, because people are hearing about, the great migration or the great succession or, the war for talent and what we're doing. And in the course of our conversation, we've sort of kind of brought that to fruition in terms of the day-to-day lives of many that we see and that we experience on a day-to-day basis. But, one of the things that we talked about in preparing for this is your United Way is data-driven, evidence-based, and my colleague Scott Mengbear is on, and he's sort of kind of our data guy, if you will. And there is a plethora of data. So for any in our audience who really want to research some of these things, this is not just what we've seen and heard or what we know through anecdotal experiences. This is something that is statistically a challenge for us as a nation when we think about the labor economy and certainly the workforce. And so I wanted to just ask one thing about the return to the office, or for some returning to the workforce. There was a MetLife study done back in October of 2021 that talks about, 2 in 3 who left in the workforce during the pandemic do plan to return to the office. 8 in 10 are considering that. But there are some things that people want to see that both of you have brought up that employers should be looking at, and organizations and companies should be looking at, to ensure that they offer these as not just the carrot to get you in the door, but the salve to keep you there, because it's not just recruitment, it's retention as well, when we know that there's a business associated with actually looking for talent. So, out of that statistic, it's some of what you all have just said. It's 78% want more flexibility. 73% want career progression. Sheila, you talked about how people can still grow in their careers, even as they're doing things in a non-traditional fashion. You talked about micro credentials. Don't just assume that you know someone when you see a gap in their resume, or looking for reasons to sort of kind of whittle them out because they may not have the degree or that continuity of service. And then, Jennifer, you talked about, working with DE&I. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is not something you do, it's simply who you are, and it's how we create that culture. And then for those who are seeking career changes, I know some accountants that went on to become educators, because they wanted a sort of kind of a mid-career change. As we think about those micro skills and we talk about, moving up to the next level, or what does returning to the workforce mean, what else can we do to make this more interesting? Because we really want our audience to continue the conversation.
Well, I would say 2 things we haven't talked about that could be worth another whole webinar on is we talked a little bit about the need to provide technical training to workers, because things have shifted both in terms of priorities of workers. And you just mentioned that, Rosie, a lot of people want to do something different. They don't want to go back to doing what they did. And then also the job market, the jobs that are out there, employers are having a hard time finding people with the experience to take on those jobs. So guess what? Somebody's got to train workers, and what a great way to build confidence. What a great way to let a worker know that they're valued. And so nonprofits, in my personal opinion, nonprofits have taken on the burden of doing these types of training, which is great. But I also think companies need to partner or invest in it as well, and to start to pay their workers who they need to train. Because if you want to bring in workers from underserved populations, you can't expect them to get the training on their own when they also need to pay the bills.
Absolutely.
So hire them and pay them. So that's one. And then the other one, which is a whole nother conversation, is how, as employers, can we help solve the childcare crisis, right?
Well, you solve that, you have, borderline solve the cure for cancer. So Jennifer, you get our last statement as we want our audience, and then we'll wrap up and get them back to their day. But some of your final thoughts for us as well.
Sure. Again, just echoing everything you shared, Rosie, as well as Sheila. I think the benefits that we offer, I think if you talk to any HR professional, they can name you some of the most underutilized benefits. Often, before COVID, people were getting free tickets or, those benefits. But benefits like mental health, benefits like assistance with childcare, finding mental health, those are really made a difference throughout the pandemic. And even in retention, you saw folks who literally, were in that 2 out of 3, but said, my mental health coverage is that important for me to stay. Like, that was the reason. So I think for employers, making sure that the wraparound resources in the benefit packages, that we're really able to extend them and to really, again, create that culture of being able to take mental health days and seeking mental health benefits for gyms and, physical health. They're so important, not only just to offer, but also to offer a culture that prioritizes that. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And so we're right at the 3 o'clock hour. I do want to thank, in addition to, of course, our panelists who brought us great insights that I hope will allow us to continue the conversation. I do want to thank my colleagues from United Way of the National Capital Area. We've talked a lot about human capital issues, and I'm not certain if she's on, but Rose Johnson is our human and talent executive. And we too have to employ all of these advantages that you've shared with us today in order to, so that we can remain as impactful as we want and need to be. So we hope for all of our guests who've been on, and I know a couple of our board members have been on as well. I do want to acknowledge them along with my colleagues and encourage us all to keep the conversation going. And I hope that both Sheila and Jennifer will join us so that we can continue to seek some solutions and bring that thought leadership to some of the toughest challenges right now, which is our workforce. Thank you so much on behalf of your United Way. Thank you for being with us today, Jennifer and Sheila, and thank you to all of our audience. Make it a great afternoon.
Thanks.